Hi, I'm Amanda Heidemann, and the global environmental problem that I chose to learn about is overfishing and marine fish stock degradation. So overfishing occurs when fish stocks are depleted at a rate faster than species can repopulate. And so historically, it's been really difficult to learn about marine fish species because there's a lack of access to the ocean and technology to study them. And it was thought that fish stocks were inexhaustible in the past. So this thinking has led to the oceans being the largest example of the tragedy of the commons, where people globally were unaware of the damage they were causing to food webs when they were overfishing and simply thought that they could fish as much as they wanted and there would always be more fish. So even though we know that the ocean isn't an inexhaustible resource anymore, overfishing is still occurring. And modern cases of overfishing have been the result of advances in technology and increases in consumption. In 2010, it was found that 1/3 to 1/2 of fish of commercial marine species had been overfished during the past half century. And because we don't have very much historical data on what these fish species populations looked like before we began fishing, we actually think that these estimates are on the lower end, and we have a higher percentage of these marine species being overfished than what we previously thought. So in order to combat overfishing, we need to increase localized management of fisheries. We need to listen to indigenous voices and incorporate their knowledge into our management strategies. And we also need to increase our accountability globally. So for increasing localized management, I want to allow local fisheries to set catch limits, increase research on specific species, and work with local fishing captains to aid in conserving species by allowing the people that know the most to manage the area. An example of how regional management could occur is from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Regional Fisheries Management Councils in the U.S. And there are 8 regional management councils throughout the U.S. that are divided up and manage the different areas where the most prominent fisheries are. And then this model could be used globally in other countries to divide up into more local management styles and then have federal funding allocated towards having more local and regional management. And then listening to indigenous voices is going to be one of the best ways that we can work on fixing this crisis. And so an example that we had of this is Dr. Hopla, who's a fisheries analyst for the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council, and she's working on incorporating indigenous knowledge into fisheries management as a tool to combat overfishing. So we know that indigenous people have lived with the land for thousands of years and have knowledge that can be key to reducing overfishing. They understand the area, they understand species on a level that modern commercial fisheries don't necessarily understand. Unfortunately, they've also suffered from great environmental injustice. And so from there, hopefully we are finding a solution where learning and compensating indigenous people for their knowledge will aid in both environmental justice and fisheries management. And so hopefully Dr. Hopela's work will be a model for how indigenous voices are being uplifted globally and incorporated into these fisheries management practices. And then lastly, on a global scale, we want to increase global accountability. So there have been efforts in the past to mitigate overfishing, and one of the most prominent agreements was the UN Nations Fish Stocks Agreement for highly migratory fish stocks. And they are meeting, and they still meet, but with any large multilateral agreement, it's difficult to create accountability. And so one of the other solutions that could come from this would be to develop an annual global fish stocks report. And so with this report, it would come out every year with numbers on how fish stocks are doing in order for countries to be aware of how these highly migratory stocks are actually doing and see if overfishing is still occurring on an annual basis to understand fish stocks on a greater level and work to create this accountability where shared knowledge will create a place for countries to come together and begin to work together. And here are my sources.